In 1991, fully 20 years after the legendary Pong had been released to the world, a senior at the University of Chicago named Alex Seropian wrote his own version of it for the Mac. He cleverly titled it GNOP, Pong spelled backwards, and decided to release it for free as a company instead of as himself. After much thought, he settled on a name, and so young Alex found himself with a game with zero revenue. It was, after all, free, and his own company. He called it Bungie. Why he called it Bungie is a closely guarded secret to this day, with various conflicting rumors swirling around. Whatever the reason, later that year, Seropian released his real pet project, Operation Desert Storm, thus entering the commercial gaming market. It was based on the war going on, though Seropian would later claim it was the other way around, with Saddam Hussein's head being the final boss. Bungie at the time was developing exclusively for the Mac, partially because the Mac gaming market wasn't as crowded as the Windows one, and partially because Seropian knew the Mac and was too lazy to learn anything else. The game was self-distributed on floppy disks Seropian had stolen during a summer internship at Microsoft. Sadly, the game only sold about 2,500 copies, but for a one-man company operated out of a basement, that's not too bad. Still at UChicago, Seropian learned that one of his classmates had almost finished a game of his own, and decided to bring him on board. Thus, Jason Jones became the proud second employee of Bungie Software, and Seropian helped Jones finish his adventure game Minotaur in 1992. While the game wasn't any more of a success than Operation Desert Storm had been, it was notable for being a very early adopter of networked multiplayer gaming, a philosophy that would serve Bungie well down the road. In 1993, with the guys now out of college and actually trying to make it as a company, they released Pathways into Darkness. Something of a combo between an FPS and an RPG, the game was a multi-award winner and Bungie's first real success. It grew Bungie's small but already dedicated fan base by quite a bit, and made them enough money to start work on a larger scale game. The result of that money and effort was called Marathon, which was released in December 1994. Marathon was an FPS, but for its time had one of the most in-depth storylines yet developed. It also boasted an advanced physics engine and introduced vertical aiming to the world. Of course, network multiplayer was featured again, this time with maps built specifically for multiplayer, an industry first. Marathon was a runaway success and turned Bungie into a dominant Mac platform developer overnight. Marathon was followed by two equally successful sequels, and Bungie began to grow in size and ability, developing cross-platform games and even briefly having a separate publisher division. Deciding to switch gears completely, Bungie's next title was Myth, a real-time tactics fantasy game in which players took control of groups of soldiers and tried to outthink their enemy. Once again innovating in the online arena, Bungie became the first developer to host its own dedicated multiplayer server, Bungie.net.
Another villager, a small girl not yet old enough for the fields, said that she had seen brigands take her father and a few others in the direction of that trail.
This made multiplayer gaming in Myth markedly easier than in other games on the market, since all the trouble of setting up and maintaining network connections was handled by Bungie instead of the players. Myth was another commercial success and was soon followed by a sequel cleverly titled Myth 2. Myth 2 sold well, but ended up forcing Bungie to issue $1 million recall because a bug in the code was wiping entire hard drives clean. In the late 90s, the company went through a number of changes. It opened a second division, Bungie West, which released the action game Oni, and immediately closed. Then in 1999, Bungie proved itself to be one of the very top echelon of Mac game developers when Steve Jobs introduced Halo at that year's Macworld Expo. The game was to be cross-platform on both Mac and Windows, and was selected by Jobs as one of the shining examples of the Mac's graphical ability. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, a call from Microsoft would soon change all that. The Xbox offered a stable, powerful platform that no one else in the industry had yet gotten to play with. Combined with the financial backing of one of the wealthiest corporations in the world, Bungie couldn't say no. They uprooted from Chicago and came to Redmond, Washington. The traditional professional culture of Microsoft was at odds with the laid-back, irreverent attitude of Bungie, and so they successfully requested to be given their own building to retain their identity. After knocking out all the walls of their building to give it a more open feeling, Bungie was safely planted in their new soil. Outside opinions of the acquisition were initially negative, with many feeling they'd been robbed of the Mac version of Halo. Besides, other than Rare's GoldenEye for the Nintendo 64, there had never been a successful shooter on a console before. This bad press started to turn around as increasingly polished builds of the game were shown to the press. Fantastic graphics, distinctive art design, and intuitive control schemes quickly had game journalists raving about the game.
Recon reporting. Hostiles have been neutralized.
Say again? Over.
The drop zone is clear. I repeat, the drop zone is clear.
Understood. Lieutenant, let's get this thing moving.
In short order, Halo became the most anticipated launch title of Microsoft's first foray in gaming hardware. Not everything went swimmingly, however. Since Halo had to be a launch title, it had to be finished by the date Microsoft had set for the Xbox's release. On top of the time crunch, the fiercely independent studio found itself answerable to Microsoft executives who thought in less relaxed terms than the typical Bungie employee. Worse, Bungie's die-hard support for multiplayer gaming suffered a blow when Microsoft stated that they would not be able to finish Xbox Live by the time of the console's release. As such, multiplayer on Halo would be limited to LAN networks. But perhaps most painfully, on July 19th, Alex Seropian, the man who had founded Bungie in college merely as a way to distribute his own games, announced he was leaving it behind. The Master Chief had taken his first victim. Despite the hardships, the dedication of the Bungie staff, not to mention Microsoft's money, eventually resulted in the slightly clumsily titled Halo: Combat Evolved. On November 15, 2001, both Halo and the Xbox were unleashed on the world. Halo was a mammoth success, so much so that it became a flagship title for the Xbox and helped drive sales of the console. The game became famous for its top-of-the-line graphics and balanced gameplay. It made famous the idea of limiting the player's weapons choices. Instead of being able to carry every weapon in the game, the player now had to choose between any two guns. This in turn led to the idea that there shouldn't be weak weapons and better weapons, but rather that all guns should have their own pros and cons. As such, weapon selection, combination, and use became a part of the gameplay in ways no other shooter had achieved.
They crashed with more damage than I suspected. Coolant leakage rate is significant. The ship's reactor should already have gone critical.
The story itself, about a space marine discovering a giant ring world and fighting an alien race for control of it, quickly drew in gamers for its epic scope and science fiction sensibilities. The lead character, the Master Chief, was never seen by players. Only his unique armor was visible, which became synonymous with the franchise and allowed the players to self-identify with the otherwise faceless hero. Combined with the intuitive control scheme and the birth of network console gaming, and you had the recipe for a monster hit. Perhaps as a consolation gift for its early fans, Halo was eventually released on both Mac and PC in September 2003, nearly 4 years after its announcement at Macworld 99, and 2 years after its arrival on Xbox. The popularity of Halo led to several spin-off projects, both commissioned and unexpected. Several novels based in the Halo universe were released, both expanding on the game's story and filling in the background of the game. While these were official projects, somewhere in Texas, a group of slackers were cooking up their own kind of story, the Machinima series Red vs. Blue, The Blood Gulch Chronicles. Initially meant to be a 6-episode joke, the show became so successful that it's still going strong today.
Hey, yeah? You ever wonder why we're here?
It is considered the first breakout hit of the medium, and helped to raise awareness of Halo to so many non-gamers that Microsoft offered them the right to make money off their work. All this attention led to some incredible numbers, with 1 million units sold in under 5 months, going on to nearly 6.5 million units sold today. With its main character and score quickly reaching iconic status in the gaming community, the question of a sequel became not one of if, but when. Halo was unquestionably the most successful game of the Xbox launch. Such was its popularity that Bungie claims it was never even given a green light to make a sequel. It was simply assumed by all parties that one was being made. There were a lot of things going in Bungie's favor. For one thing, Bungie had reaped unbelievable profits from the first game. For another, Microsoft, who knew that Halo was helping sell more Xboxes than any advertising campaign, was willing to support Bungie any way they wanted. This included funding an in-depth alternate reality game launched out of the website ilovebees.com. This was a simple website that became infected by artificial intelligence, dropping clues that fans could decipher to unlock new game information. In only 3 months, the interactive marketing page had been visited nearly 3 million times. But most important of all, the much vaunted Xbox Live would be ready by the time Halo 2 was finished, which meant that the online-loving Bungie could at last unleash a top-rate multiplayer experience onto the console world. Expectations, however, proved to be a double-edged sword. Microsoft and fans alike demanded to see trailers and gameplay footage, leading to a trailer as early as 2002 and a playable demo at E3 2003. Unfortunately, none of these had anything to do with the actual game. The trailer was not a game cinematic and the demo was not an actual level. As such, Bungie realized it had wasted far too much time and too many resources on these secondary projects, and not on the game itself. While crunch time is a familiar concept to game developers, Bungie found itself going into overdrive mode over a year before the game's release date. As that date hurtled ever closer, the studio was forced to accept that it was never going to finish the project they had envisioned, or if they did, it would be so buggy and untested it might kill the franchise. In a rush, the studio was forced to jettison several levels from the game just to finish what they had started. Despite all this, the game was released on time on November 9, 2004. Artifacts of the game's rush to the finish line were obvious. The game's cinematics suffered from frequent pop-ins and graphical errors, and the story ended on a totally unintended cliffhanger note forced by the curtailed level development.
You mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
But as the first reviews came in, Bungie found that they had little to fear. The reviews across the board were not just positive, but stellar. And as the sales numbers came in, Bungie discovered that they'd done it again. Buoyed by a record 1.5 million pre-orders, the game sold 2.4 million copies in a single day, for a total of $125 million. For reference, earlier that year, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas had made only $103 million in its first 6 days. And even the Spider-Man movie had grossed a record-setting $114 million in 3 days. Fans found that the game was, for the most part, an enhancement of the original, with better graphics and a slew of new weapons. On top of this, Bungie added some new elements, like the ability to dual wield, taking Halo's already innovative approach to weapon use to new heights. Fans of the story were also rewarded with a much more in-depth look at the enemy, the Covenant, with their champion, the Arbiter, becoming a playable character, a kind of gameplay twist not commonly found in games.
What would you have your Arbiter do?
Halo 2 also did away with the health bar system, simplifying the player's stats and getting rid of the need to have health packs conveniently strewed around alien ships. The resulting reviving life system has gone on to be almost universal in shooter games today. But of course, all of this paled next to the allure of Xbox Live. Already a legendary multiplayer game, bringing Halo to the internet allowed fans to play pickup games whenever they wanted with teams of up to 16 people. Curiously, Bungie, who had pioneered server-style gameplay back with the original Myth, did not allow players to host their own servers with their own gameplay types and rules. While this severely restricted player options, it also allowed for Bungie to create a finely crafted online experience, based upon rounds instead of continuous play, that has become central to the Halo experience in a way it could not have otherwise. Halo 2 remains the single best-selling game of the original Xbox, having sold 8.5 million units to date. More importantly, it cemented Halo as a killer franchise and not just a one-hit wonder. It was now apparent that Halo was the biggest gaming franchise of its generation, and it was exclusive to the Xbox. Microsoft had found its champion. But once again, Bungie was to find that such success was a double-edged sword. With record sales and a new Microsoft console on the horizon, a third game in the Halo franchise was a no-brainer. Knowing that next-generation graphics required extra hands, and remembering the pain of Halo 2's sustained crunch period, Bungie massively expanded its staff. So much so that they moved out of the Microsoft campus and into a new building in Kirkland, Washington. But though they were in their own location now, in some ways, Bungie felt more tied down by the software giant than ever. Microsoft wouldn't even consider letting Bungie create a whole new game before Halo 3 came out. Worse, since Microsoft owned the intellectual property rights to the franchise, they announced to Bungie that they were giving a different game studio, Ensemble, the task of creating a Halo RTS. A Halo MMO and a handheld Halo were also begun by other studios, though they were never finished. Fiercely protective of their games, Bungie was forced to watch their baby get farmed out to other parents. The laid-back guys from Chicago found themselves the victim of their own success.
Got a new contact, unknown classification.
Despite their internal woes, outside, fans were clamoring to know the conclusion of Halo 2's cliffhanger. Bungie dove right into production on the cleverly titled Halo 3. Learning from the mistakes they made during Halo 2's production cycle, Bungie initially did very little outside of work directly associated with the finished product. While the first teaser for Halo 2 had come out only a few months after Halo 1's release, Halo 3 wasn't even formally announced for nearly 2 years. Combined with their newly tremendous staff size and ginormous budget, and Bungie found Halo 3's development to be both smooth and rapid, a welcome change. So rapid, in fact, that they found they had the opportunity to do something no console game had done before, a public beta. This would be a dramatic improvement over the Halo 2 demo, since the Halo 3 beta would feature actual levels from the game and allow user feedback on the whole experience. So instead of detracting from the development cycle, the beta would accomplish the same marketing task while actively assisting the team. But at the insistence of, as Bungie called it, their benevolent dictator, the beta was only accessible to people who bought the unrelated game Crackdown. The game ended up being a huge success, no doubt helped by rabid Halo fans, many of whom probably never even played the game they bought. Meanwhile, the brand name of the franchise proved its muscle when the Halo graphic novel was released in 2006. Game-to-comic adaptations are traditionally low sellers, but HGN ended up being one of the highest-selling graphic novels of the year. After a massive marketing campaign, Halo 3 was released on September 25, 2007. After Halo 2's record-setting 1.5 million pre-orders, Halo 3 received 4 million. It would go on to make $170 million on its first day of release, the highest-grossing opening day of any media product in history, including the recent Spider-Man film and Harry Potter book. The game once again featured a slew of new enhancements, while still being mostly the same experience. Graphics received a hefty upgrade for the HD-capable Xbox 360. New weapons were introduced, and some old ones returned, all mapped onto the newer, better 360 controller. Most unexpected, however, was another console first: the ability to mod not only gameplay types, but maps. Halo 3's Forge mode was much more limiting than a full-on map editor that PC gamers were used to, but as with the strictly controlled Bungie.net interface, these limitations allowed for a finely honed experience. Players would always be in the maps they knew and loved, but their experience in those maps could now be wildly different. And in yet another console first, Halo 3 had a theater mode that allowed players to watch their single and multiplayer games with full camera controls, and then share them with their friends over Xbox Live. Needless to say, this took Halo Machinima to a whole new level. Despite Halo's massive popularity and Hollywood's poor box office of the time, the long-in-development Halo film, to be produced by Peter Jackson, was declared dead in late 2007. The film studios apparently wanted to renegotiate the financing at the last second, which led to a breakdown between the various parties involved. Similarly, a follow-up to the successful Halo graphic novel, entitled Halo Uprising, met with massive delays. Supposed to be completed by the time of Halo 3's launch, the fourth and final issue did not arrive on shelves until April 2009. Despite its spin-off projects meeting with difficulties, Halo 3 has become the best-selling game on Microsoft's successful Xbox 360 console. 2 years after its release, it crossed the 10 million sold mark. But even with all the success, the wars over Halo had not ended, and were about to break up one of the most profitable partnerships in gaming history. Bungie claims they finalized the terms of their break from Microsoft on July 7th, 2007. 777. Given Bungie's known love of the number 7, this could be a bit of retroactive history. Regardless, the announcement was made public on October 5th, barely a week after Halo 3 had hit shelves. Bungie would be leaving Microsoft to fend for themselves once again, although they would continue to make games for Microsoft platforms. And as of August 2009, their only announced titles are Xbox 360 exclusives. While no official reason has ever been given for the split, and Bungie and Microsoft have been all smiles and sunshine ever since, it is generally believed that Microsoft's handling of the Halo franchise was the primary factor. Specifically, the fact that Microsoft had tasked a number of other studios to create Halo titles. To date, the only one to be released is Ensemble Studios' Halo Wars, an RTS for the Xbox 360. The RTS genre has had a lot of difficulty being ported to the console due to the nature of its input mechanisms versus those of a PC. Microsoft had recognized this hole in console libraries and saw an opportunity to fill it with an RTS designed specifically for the console. Not surprisingly, they wanted to wrap this gameplay around the art and story of its most popular franchise. On the surface, all seemed well. Ensemble claimed to be in close contact with Bungie over every aspect of the game to ensure authenticity. The hype for this game was huge, and it was in a way a return to Halo's roots. The first Halo had begun life as an RTS. Still, the Bungie-Microsoft break itself was a bad indicator. Worse, in September 2008, 5 months before the Halo Wars game would even be released, Microsoft announced that it would be shutting down Ensemble Studios. As with the Bungie break, no official reason was ever given. A few core personnel soldiered on to the game's conclusion, and it released on February 26, 2009. The game received generally good reviews and is considered by some to be a shining example of an RTS on a console. Its story, however, is not given the same credit, and has been faulted for being a fairly generic sci-fi action story that just happens to be set in Halo's world.
Lady, I haven't got all day. You want to be rescued or not?
The fact that the game had several plot inconsistencies, such as the presence of the Flood, didn't help. Nevertheless, the game had gone on to be a success, selling 1.3 million copies in only 6 months. Great for any game, though poor compared to Bungie's Halo titles. But on October 9, 2008, Bungie announced that it was working on a new title as well. Halo 3 ODST would be a standalone expansion to Halo 3, fleshing out the story through a different character's perspective. While still an FPS, the game would feature more stealth aspects and a tweaked gameplay experience to go along with the new character. And before ODST was even released, at E3 2009, Bungie announced still another Halo title, Halo Reach. The reveal of not one, but 2 further Halo games begs the question as to why exactly Bungie split from Microsoft, as they seem to be doing exactly what Microsoft would have wanted them to do. Speculation is rampant that Bungie must be working on another, non-Halo project, but at the moment, that is just a rumor. Whatever Bungie has up its sleeve, the continued popularity of Halo, with 4 games released and 2 in development, ensures that the franchise will live on well into the next decade at the least. How far it will go remains to be seen, though for its part, Bungie has stated that Halo Reach will be the last Halo title they ever make. But with a newly announced anime series on the way, rumors of a Halo film being resurrected, and Microsoft's promise of further titles to come, Halo is striking out into the world on its own. How the saga will play out beyond Bungie's guiding hands is anyone's guess.
Wake me when you need me.